Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. We at the Moms on a Mission podcast, everything we do is to challenge the current godless culture. We have three pillars, and that is to educate, awake, and activate others. We align with the truth of history and the truth of the Word of God. And we believe in instilling that in our children, with our family and friends as well, all so that we can save our country. And we do that with those three pillars: educating, awakening, and activating others. So if you align, if you believe this, I would so love for you to join me on this mission. I believe that if we all do something, if we lock arms and we stand up for truth, we can save our country. But it's going to require us all to do something, but we can do it together. We're stronger together than we are apart. And that's why I had on today Dr. Stanley Goldfarb. He joins the Moms on Mission podcast, and he was talking about truth as it relates to medical school and how the medical schools and societies have been hijacked by the progressive left. They're turning these medical students into activists. He talks about climate change and confirmation bias and how that is being injected into medical schools. And I think what's really interesting about our conversation today is that these are things that all parents, all families can use, because these ideologies are injected in elementary school and high school. They're injected in Christian schools, private schools, government schools, all over. So we can learn a lot. And I think if we learn from him, we can notice and recognize it in our own schools, in our own communities. So I think you're going to like this conversation. It'll be real helpful. But before he joins us, I wanted to talk to you about Grid Down, Chow Down, freeze-dried beef. It's 95% fat-free, so it's incredibly healthy, and it's really convenient. If you don't have meat defrosted, if it's in your pantry and you pull it out, you can have it ready to go in 10 minutes. It's rehydrated in 10 minutes with water. But what's also neat is it tastes amazing. I know it sounds kind of strange, freeze-dried meat, but it tastes really great. I've made tacos with it. I'm getting ready to make chili with it. And what's so neat about it is that in the processing, they use the entire cow. They don't just use the leftover cuts. They use filet cuts, tenderloin, ribeye. And that's what makes it taste so, so good. So if you go to griddownchowdown.com, that's griddownchowdown.com. At the bottom of the show in the content description, you can find a link there. But order just one. Order one and try it and see what you think. But I think it's really great to have this on hand with everything that happened a few years ago. That one time I went to the grocery store and I saw all the shelves bare, like no meat, no chicken, no nothing. I thought, I'm not going to let that happen again. I want to have this on hand. And then please follow us on Rumble. We're on all platforms, but Rumble is the most uncensored platform. If you download the app, go to the top, type in Moms on a Mission, and then click the follow icon, and then you'll be notified when new episodes are released. And then like and share the episodes as well. Hi, Dr. Goldfarb. Thank you so much for joining me again on the Moms on a Mission podcast.
My pleasure.
So for those who didn't get the first two episodes where we talked about your book and your article in the Wall Street Journal, can you just share a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm a retired physician now. I was a nephrologist, which means I cared for patients with kidney disease. And I had a long career as an academic physician at the University of Pennsylvania, which finished up with my role as the Associate Dean for Curriculum in the Perelman School of Medicine at Penn.
So what the other two interviews when we were talking about how you wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal, Take 2 Aspirin and Call Me by My Pronouns. And you had just a limited area where you could discuss this hijacking of our medical systems and hospitals and medical schools by this Marxist DEI, basically reverse racism construct. And so you talked about that briefly in the Wall Street Journal, and then you wrote this book. And so we talked about your book in the last episode where we talked about this whole issue. And so we didn't get to finish this. And so I wanted to pick up where we left off in that last interview. And so I wanted you to touch on the confirmation bias that you discussed in your book. And I wanted to read a sentence here. I don't have my reading glasses, so hopefully I won't butcher this, but you said, as is painfully obvious, there is an incentive to find racism when investigating disparate health outcomes. What did you mean by that?
Well, there certainly are big disparities in health outcomes between minority groups, particularly Black Americans and other groups. And this observation somehow has been transmitted into the idea that disparities means racism. And there are a lot of sort of race hustlers that claim that every time they see a disparity, the only explanation for it is bias on the part, in this case, the healthcare system or physicians against Black patients. Now, unfortunately, the disparities are very complicated issues. And I don't deny the fact that there may be a physician out there that didn't treat one patient well, and that there are a few biased physicians out there. I have no doubt that that is true. But as a systematic problem in healthcare, it just isn't the basis for healthcare disparities. And every time one really looks at the literature on this, what you find is that the researchers typically identify a problem, some disparity, and then they immediately leap to the idea that they found causality and that they understand the cause of it. And they usually refer in their papers to other literature that shows that physicians are biased. And when you look at that other literature that they refer to, it turns out that what they're using almost invariably is something called the implicit association test, which is a test that was designed by Harvard researchers to identify whether individuals have bias. And that test has been shown to be unreliable. That test has been shown to not explain the vast majority of the observations that are made about how physicians view patients and how individuals view other individuals. And there are a number of very careful psychological studies that have shown, for example, one by Professor Arcus at Ohio State University, who's written a book about this, showing how the implicit bias test is an unreliable test. So what we see when we look at the literature is a disparity is identified. For example, I'll give you one example, which is that Black patients who have peripheral vascular disease, where they have poor circulation, particularly in their legs, Black men tend to have amputations much more frequently than white men. So this has been attributed to physicians not caring well for Black patients. However, when you talk to vascular surgeons about this, it turns out one of the commonest problems that they see is Black patients tend to come in late in the course of their illness. Now, when they come in late in the course of their illness, it's often too late to save the leg, and it's not possible to do a vascular procedure that might restore blood flow to the leg. Now, this isn't to say that there aren't real social problems that may lead to a Black patient coming in late. They may have two jobs that they're working and feel like they can't take time off. They may have difficulty getting access to the healthcare system. That all may be real. But the solution to that is not to blame doctors for bias or to produce a demand that physicians take courses in implicit bias training under the presumption that the physicians are causing the problem. And the real tragedy here is that the way to improve this is to increase the education in the Black community, that when they start to experience certain symptoms, that they get in to see their physician sooner. Now, realize that the differences in most of these studies are small. Maybe they'll find that something happens to white patients 40% of the time and happens to Black patients 50% of the time. That means that most Black patients are acting properly, are showing up early enough, are getting treatment, but a small percentage aren't. But invariably, we see in the literature on this that the authors of the studies then leap to this idea that physicians are being biased. And this has led, for example, recently in the Annals of Internal Medicine, there was an article that showed, I think there were 8 or 9 states now that require physicians take implicit bias training every 2 years in order to get their licenses renewed. Well, this is expensive, it's time consuming, and not only that, but it really angers individuals when they're told you are biased, whether you know it or not, and you are treating your patients differently because of their skin color, for example, or some other immutable characteristics. People hate to hear this because they hate it because it's rarely true. and it just leads to even more hostility, more divisiveness. So in my book, I went through several examples where studies have claimed bias as the basis for disparate health outcomes. And yet I show that, there are important other explanations. But Ibram Kendi, one of the great race hustlers of our time, who has recently been investigated because they couldn't find where the $43 million that his center got really where it went to. Maybe they found that there was no corruption associated with it, but he certainly hasn't been very productive. But he's the man who keeps saying, every time I see disparities, I see bias, I see racism, and it's just wrong. So I go through several examples in the book, like that example of Black patients having to undergo surgeries and removal of limbs because of poor vascular flow, when in fact it could be avoided if they had access to healthcare in a more timely fashion.
I just find it so fascinating that physicians are so intelligent, and it's so hard to establish a correlation and any type of causality type of relationship. And yet it's like all of that is just thrown out the window because somebody wants to prove something. So it's true. We want it to be true. So therefore it's true. It's just shocking to me.
And I think part of the problem is that in order to get papers published these days that speak to the question of disparate care and disparate outcomes, it's almost required that you come to the conclusion that it represents bias, and that you put that in the paper, and then you refer to a study that used the implicit association test, this unreliable test, as proof of what you see. So the whole thing is a terrible house of cards that unfortunately is not benefiting Black patients. It's not benefiting the educational system. It's certainly not benefiting Black patients, because if an institution wants to improve the health of their Black patients who are having severe peripheral vascular disease, as I said before, they need to educate the community about this. They don't need to send the doctors to implicit bias training. It's really the wrong diagnosis for the problem, and then it's the wrong treatment, which ends up delaying the proper treatment.
Well, it's like the problem is not even a problem. I mean, like you said and referred to earlier, there might be a couple of biased physicians, but to infer that the whole community is biased and they're just born that way is, so the problem's not there. And then they're creating a solution that, even if the problem were there, isn't the right solution anyway.
Yeah, well, that's the difficulty. And the mainstream press is very complicit in this. They'll then take these articles and write them up. I can give you another interesting example. I think it came out after my book was put together, but there was one article that I saw. This may take a moment to go through. It was in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the article was about the fact that the use of insulin pumps in children with diabetes turned out to be much less common in Black children than it was in white children. And the data from this was reported in the Philadelphia Inquirer based on an editorial that was written by physicians at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia about an article that was in the pediatric literature. So the newspaper article is about an editorial that was written about another article. Now, in the newspaper article, they've neglected to mention, although it was in the editorial that they commented upon, they neglected to mention that this observation was based on international findings. It wasn't just in the United States. They looked at two other large databases besides the one in the United States. They looked at one in Europe, and they looked at one in Australia and New Zealand. And in each case, in those countries, the minority individuals had either less access or less utilization of insulin pumps, which led to less optimum diabetes care. So that was the first thing that they neglected to say in the press that was even commented upon by the authors. Now, the authors of the editorial also said this represented bias, and they had a bunch of references. So I looked up the references that they had the citations they had to what they claimed was the basis for saying this was biased. And they identified a study that was done in the United States looking at whether, when they asked physicians who took care of children with diabetes who needed an insulin pump as one of their treatments, what the basis for them deciding to use an insulin pump in the patients. And in fact, when they asked whether they would differentiate its use based on the race of the patient, the answer was no, they wouldn't. They did differentiate the use of the pump based on the insurance that the patients had. And the reason for that is it turns out that if you wanted to put a patient who was on Medicaid on an insulin pump, the reporting characteristics were really burdensome. And if you didn't report the characteristics, and the reporting meant that the parents had to test the child's blood sugar 2 or 3 times a day to use an insulin pump. And if they didn't do that, they wouldn't qualify for an insulin pump. So the reason that the doctors didn't order insulin pumps in the children is that they knew that the parents would not be able to comply because the requirements were so burdensome in compliance. So realize what happened here. The public, in looking at this Philadelphia Inquirer article, thought white doctors weren't giving Black children insulin pumps. It turns out this was a worldwide problem and has to do with all sorts of social issues, no doubt, because, again, it was seen in multiple countries where the minority populations weren't getting the same kind of health care that the majority populations were for all sorts of important reasons. In this particular case in the United States, the biggest reason was the problems with Medicaid insurance and not the problem with bias on the part of physicians. Now, no one is going to go and track down these issues when they read a story in the Philadelphia Inquirer. They're going to look at this story and say, those white doctors are doing it again to these poor Black children. I wrote to the reporter and I said, did you ever ask the doctors who wrote this editorial whether there's any difference in the way they treat their patients who have diabetes who need insulin pumps? Do the Black patients in their clinic get the same frequency of insulin pumps as the white? She never responded to me. Obviously these are the sorts of issues. So that whole article could have been written in a very different fashion than she wrote it, the reporter for the Inquirer, but she wrote it in a way that made it seem like that these physicians that care for patients in the United States who are Black patients with diabetes treat them in a less than optimal fashion. And it turns out it just is totally wrong and not true and doesn't represent the reality of the field. And this goes on over and over and over again. So unfortunately, it's very hard to trust the mainstream press when it comes to reporting on medical problems. And, unfortunately, our country has seen this now in multiple instances over the last few years. And it's a terrible shame because it's important that there be trust in the healthcare system, but it's been eroded dramatically by this sort of propaganda that's gone on.
Of all institutions to be hijacked, the fact that the medical institution has been is just so disturbing and saddening and a little bit scary when you think about, you just think they should be the last place where you would have a social contagion injected in them, like DEI. One thing I was just kind of thinking, it was kind of funny when you were talking, I thought, man, you must be their worst nightmare. It's like a magician going up and doing these magic tricks and you're sitting on the front row, like explaining the way that they're doing the trick, and I just had this image in my mind of you just like shredding all of their lies and their propaganda and saying, well, actually, no, this is what the source says. No, actually, no, this is what it says. And sadly, the damage has kind of already been done when they read the newspaper and when they see these articles. I mean, we all say, oh yes, mainstream media propaganda, but it really is believable. I mean, people who are part of a low information group, they're going to believe everything that they read. And let's be honest, if you don't dig deeper, it sounds legit. It's in black and white in the front page of a fairly prestigious newspaper. I mean, you're going to believe it. And
it's our only it's our only newspaper in Philadelphia to speak of. So if it's there, that becomes reality. And the news, and I read articles every day, and the question I ask is sort of a one, just invert the story. Just take the story that you read and say, what if I wrote it this a different way? How would I perceive this? And you see this all the time. And they have a narrative that they wish to pursue. The narrative is that the healthcare system is biased. That's the narrative. And therefore, everything that we're going to write about is going to demonstrate that bias, even if it's totally made up in some cases, and in other cases, it's just subtly, eliding the truth. And we see the whole spectrum of the way it's distorted. But it's a very sad situation for our country, I think.
And you talk about the dumbing down of, well, medical students, but also America at large. And when you think about it, if we're not using critical thinking skills, then we're going to be more easily lied to, and we're going to be more gullible and believe these things because we're not using critical thinking skills. So I think that goes hand in hand with that. I did want to get your take on what just happened in my state of Oklahoma with Governor Kevin Stitt banning all DEI groups and any type of that being injected into government institutions and education centers. I'm thrilled that he did this. I'm thrilled that it passed. I wanted to ask you, Dr. Goldfarb, what does this mean for medical schools when they do start banning this? Do you think that this will affect medical schools, or will the AMA and these other medical constructs and institutions at the top, will they be able to dictate what happens in the medical schools?
Well, interestingly, we got from a friend of ours at the University of Oklahoma School of Medicine and the University of Oklahoma, a memo that was sent out by the president of the university. And if you read the memo carefully, it's basically, we'll figure out a way around this, is sort of the message. So I think the citizens of Oklahoma need to be on the lookout. I think it's a very, very positive step, because it will make it harder if they don't have this diversocrat. One of our members of Do No Harm, my organization, he calls them diversocrats. This huge bureaucracy that has grown up around the whole DEI enterprise, which, understand that the language of that, it sounds great. Diversity on the surface sounds like a good thing. Equity on the surface sounds like a good thing. And inclusion, we all want to be included. No one wants to be left out. But of course, each of those words means something very, very different. What they all stand for is identity politics, where we're going to treat people as members of a group differently than other groups of patients or other groups of students or other groups of citizens. And it's very disruptive and destructive. And I think, the anti-Semitism that we've seen that's broken out all over the country is another example of what happens with identity politics. If you're a Jew, you're a Jew, and therefore you have all of these characteristics, and therefore you're an object of hate, an object of derision. If you're a Black person, here are all the characteristics we're going to give you, and we're going to treat you as if that's the same. We saw the president of Harvard is a Black woman who's hardly unprivileged and is hardly comes from a poor background. Her parents were, college educated, and she's obviously a brilliant person, and she shouldn't be treated differently because of her skin color. She should be treated like anyone else. And the same for me. I'm a Jew. I shouldn't be treated differently because I'm Jewish from anyone else. People should find out, am I a terrible person or not? That's what should determine how they treat me. And, I just think that the path that, the country has taken is terrible. So I think it's really important when the governor says, we're not going to allow any of this DEI. We're not going to have a bureaucracy in these institutions. We're not going to ask faculty members to sign agreements that they're going to pursue diversity issues above all else. I think this is a very positive step. But, again, these schools they're filled with very clever people, and they're going to try to work their way around this. And it's just unfortunate because it basically represents, a lack of freedom of speech. I know medical students have contacted us. They're afraid to speak out. They're afraid to say that they don't agree when they're told in their anatomy class that there are an infinite number of genders. They say, this is insane. This is not true. And we're dealing with a mental disorder on the part of these children that needs therapy. We need to be sympathetic and empathetic to their problem. We don't need to start them on medication that is going to ruin their lives. And this is and so I'm very hopeful about the governor's move. There are a number of states now that are entertaining laws. I think several states have passed laws now about that our organization has helped support, that have banned so-called DEI in higher education. I think it's a very, very positive step. And I think it's on the path towards improving our country and getting this hateful ideology out of academia, which is where it's taken over the way people think about the world.
I was hopeful after I heard about this that maybe just sometimes it's a domino effect and you just need one governor, one school, one person to stand up, and then others will rally behind and follow suit. So that's what my prayer is, that with him doing this, that other states will follow suit because of his action.
Yeah, and by the way, banning these offices doesn't mean that talented individuals from minority groups aren't going to have access to schools. Of course they are. If they deserve to be admitted, they'll be admitted. And if they don't deserve to be admitted, they shouldn't be admitted. And it should be that simple, because if they get admitted when they don't deserve it, then someone who does deserve it isn't getting admitted to a program or a school or a training opportunity and what have you. Whereas there should be no bias against them, but there should be no bias for them either.
Right. And when you're talking about taking the spaces of others who maybe deserved it more and had just sharper, smarter, whatever, you're seeing this in sports. You're seeing it when men pretending to be women strip other athletes, real female athletes, of scholarships and things like that. And so when they're just such small numbers of scholarships or small numbers of openings for medical students to go to school, and when you strip one, I mean, that really matters. And then in medicine, I believe that it's even worse, because when you put somebody who's inferior, who has not earned that spot, and then they become a physician, then the patients are going to suffer. And I just think DEI injected in medicine is really scary, because people are going to die because of this who wouldn't normally have died.
Yeah, and I think the people who watch this should understand something about, what's the basis for this view that we should let, for example, trans athletes participate, when we know certainly if they've gone through puberty, they have a huge advantage. There's absolutely no question about that. But this logic is a logic that says that any group that's oppressed can really do no wrong and must not be denied any kind of activity, whereas any group that is deemed an oppressor should be given no opportunity whatsoever. And since trans individuals certainly are individuals who represent a small minority of the country, have often historically been discriminated against, no question about that. Because of that, therefore, they're viewed as the oppressed people, and therefore typical sense of morality goes out the window. Typical sense of fairness goes out the window, because since they're an oppressed group, they're allowed to do whatever they want, and there can be no consequences. We see this, in the Middle East now, in the war between the Palestinians and the Israelis in Gaza. Because the Palestinians are deemed an oppressed group, it's okay for them to go in and kill 1,200 people and rape women and kidnap people. That's all understandable because they're oppressed. Well, this sort of takes Judeo-Christian thinking and morality and just throws it out the window. We believe in, that we believe in the 10 Commandments. That's what we believe in. And if you don't accept that as being the basis for your morality, then we're going to have pure chaos. And that's what we're starting to see all on college campuses now, where this oppressor dyad is taking over from the 10 Commandments as the basis for our morality.
Well, and that's the whole goal, is to deconstruct our foundation, our Judeo-Christian values. That's the whole goal of Marxism, is to destroy that. And so you have to inject those lies into every area of our country, whether it's medicine or politics or schools, education, athletics, everywhere. And that's what's so amazing to me. I wanted to ask you, were you surprised, Dr. Goldfarb, at how quickly these college students started protesting and how quickly it was spreading, almost like the George Floyd situation happened with the Israel and Palestine. I was a little taken aback by that, but then I thought about it and I thought, well, actually, probably I shouldn't be surprised because of all the riots after George Floyd. I was just wondering if you were surprised by that.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's been shocking. But in retrospect, I think it just represents they've been indoctrinated in these ideas forever. And the other problem is they just don't know anything. There's this famous piece that was in the Wall Street Journal a few days ago. The title is "From What River to What Sea," because their chant is that Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. So they did some surveys to ask them, all these young people, exactly what river are we talking about? And they had no idea. I think something like 20% of them thought it was the sea was the Atlantic Ocean that they were talking about. They said the river was the Euphrates. Some said the Ganges. Some said the Nile. They had no idea it was the Jordan River. They had no idea it was the Mediterranean Sea. They had no idea who was the prime minister of Israel. They had no idea when they were explained exactly what was being said, they said, oh, well, maybe that's not so good. So I think part of it has been the fact that they're so poorly educated. Part of it has been that they've accepted this suppress or oppress dyad as the way to understand the way you construct the morality of the world and of life. And those two, the combination of those two is deadly. The combination of ignorance and a morality that's based on a nonsensical postmodern view of the world is just led to this horrible result here that we have, where American students are just demonstrating this terrible anti-Semitic behavior. And I don't. My view is personally, I mean, I'm speaking for myself here, and it may be wrong, but I don't think they really hate Jews. I think it's just much more that they see Jews as sort of white people, and white people are the oppressors, and therefore, anytime you have an oppressor, they're at fault, they're guilty a priori, and anytime you can identify someone as oppressed, they're innocent, and whatever they've done is justified. So I think that's the dynamic that's working here. But whatever it is, it's a terrible dynamic, and it has been shocking.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I believe I've read some reports, and I would need to just make sure this is true and investigate further, but that some of them have been paid to protest. And so, a lot of that nefarious activity is going on as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Social media has certainly helped them organize themselves, but it's really been a very sad state of affairs.
Yeah. Well, before you go, I did want to touch on this one last issue that you addressed in your book. And I felt that it was very alarming to notice that progressive physicians also are attempting to save the world and are prioritizing the political agenda to do that. And I find it personally mind-boggling that you share that nearly 200 medical schools agreed to introduce courses about climate change into their curricula. And I'm searching to find the logic as to why they're doing this. Why are they deeming this so important?
Well, actually, I think our friends in Canada have explained this to us now, because the Royal College of Canadian Physicians has come out with a statement about medical education where they have said that advocacy needs to become the central focus of medical education and not medical care. Now, this is a true absurdity. Do No Harm, my organization, has helped put together a petition now to fight against this. We're up to, I think, 270 physicians now in Canada that have signed this. One of our senior fellows, Dr. Roy Eapen, who's a Canadian endocrinologist, has been leading the way on this. And so the idea here is, I think what we're seeing is the idea is to try to co-opt physicians into becoming advocates for various social issues. It's powerful when a group of people in their white coats march on a governmental office and say, we're telling you as physicians that this needs to change. They're trying to take almost all aspects of life and turn it into some medical issue. And they've done this with climate change. So climate change turns out to be a medical issue. And you know why? It's because they have frightened so many young people about the climate catastrophe, the climate crisis, whatever you want to call it, which they've come up with, that people have terrible anxiety about the future of the world because the climate is going to be such that they're not going to be able to survive in it. I personally keep saying if the climate in Philadelphia becomes the climate in Miami, that's not a bad thing.
Right?
And I'd be I'd be quite happy
Right.
with that sort of outcome. And in fact, you know, the evidence has been that these catastrophes that they're talking about have not been happening. The climate may be changing. It's always been changing. It may be due to fossil fuels. I have no idea because I have no expertise in deciding what the basis for atmospheric thermodynamics are really based on. But that's what you have to know if you're going to be talking about the climate and the risks of climate change. And as far as I know, most of the medical students don't have that scientific background. But the idea here is to create advocates, create people that can advocate for these mostly far left issues about trying to turn the world into something that resembles what it was like 200 years ago, which they somehow think is something to be aspired to. So that's what it's about. It's about trying to turn physicians and medical students into advocates for social issues, and that's why they're doing it.
But it's thinly veiled with the logic that they're going to be treating
Yeah, it's
anxiety.
the thinly veiled issue is that there are health consequences of having a warmer climate. And of course, we've always taught that there's such a thing as heat stroke. We've always taught that there are tropical diseases that people need to be aware of. I used to take care of malaria cases because I trained at a time when troops were in Vietnam and they come back from the war and they become ill and they come to the Veterans Hospital where I worked for a bit, and you know we'd have to learn how to treat malaria. So that's kind of the rationale that they use, that there are illnesses and diseases and problems that we see in the tropics that will now come to the northern hemisphere, and therefore we need to teach about this. But in fact, what they really are after is getting physicians to be advocates for fighting fossil fuel. That's basically where they are. That's all they really care about.
I'm so impressed in the worst possible way at how effective they've been. It's just astounding to me. And I have interviewed some students here who graduated from school, one from Mount Holyoke quite a while ago, I think almost 10 years ago. And that indoctrination of DEI and things of that nature, though, that social contagion was injected in that school a long time ago. And
Yeah.
so I do know that it's been around for a while, but I do believe the death of George Floyd and then with this Israeli-Palestine conflict, it is just igniting. It's kind of like the match that kind of lights everything on fire, but the gasoline has been laid probably for several years now. So that's why when I started thinking about this conflict, I thought, well, it's probably like George Floyd. They've been indoctrinated with this anti-Semitic view and really just white view that we're all white supremacists, even if we're not. And so they've probably been learning that for years. And this was just kind of an incident that ignited it and gave them the opportunity to do what they did.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, you wanted to finish on a note of hope. And I think the hope has been that I think this outpouring of anti-Semitism has opened the eyes of many people who were kind of neutral about the whole thing, liberals, but not necessarily progressive, classical liberals who just believed in individuality, suddenly see what the wages of identity politics really are. And it's horrible and it's destructive. And if someone said, do you think the countries that are opposed to the United States, that are our adversaries, are behind some of this? I have no doubt. You know, one of the things we know that Qatar, the Middle Eastern country with all of its oil, has been a huge funder of American higher educational institutions, and part of the reason that the faculty have huge Middle Eastern studies that have been sort of the hotbeds of arguing against Israel's existence and justifying what the Hamas terrorists did, has been that these institutions are getting huge amounts of money. I think in the congressional hearings that were so dramatic, one of the congressmen asked, I think the president of Harvard, about the $1.5 billion that Qatar had given to that institution over the last few years. And she seemed not to know about that, which seems a little unlikely. But, you know, but so this is another part of it, is that our country has been under assault, under a propagandistic assault from many quarters, including countries that are not that interested in our doing very well as a nation.
Yeah, that money thing. You're seeing that everywhere though. You're seeing that with Budweiser, Target, BlackRock, and Vanguard are some of their largest stockholders, and they're able to really inject their ideology. And whether Target wants to or not, they have to when their largest stockholder is demanding this. So I just find it incredibly fascinating. Well, in closing, I did want to ask you where do we go from here and what can we do? I'm not a medical doctor. I am part of your organization, Do No Harm. And I wanted to actually go to your website and show that at the same time. But where can we go from here and what can we do as Americans, even if we're not physicians, to fight back against this woke ideology?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you put that up. Joining us helps, and it helps in lots of ways. It's not about supporting us. We're happy to get support, but that's not why we want members. There's no cost to become a member. And what it will do is give us the heft to push back and show legislators and show in various states that we do have the support of large numbers of individuals. We've been working hard at the state level to pass some of these laws. Again, I'm not, I wish the government didn't have to do all this. I wish the individuals and society and the culture did not require this, but it does require the state stepping in when there really are terribly unfortunate, unfair actions that are going on. And that's certainly the case in the gender affirming care world. So joining us helps. Writing to your congressman or congresswoman or state representative when you see something that really bothers you in the newspaper or an event that occurs, when you think that you've been treated unfairly, I think speak out is really important. But we try to become the voice for individuals. And the other thing that we benefit from when we have more people that join our organization is that they send us information. They tell us, do you know what's going on in my school? And it turns out that what's going on can be really quite awful. And really, they need help. They may need legal help, which we may be able to help them with. And they certainly can get the advice that we have of our lawyers and experts that can guide them through whatever problem they're sort of dealing with. So, I think that's it. Speak out. Don't hide your voice. If you don't speak out, then the bad people are going to triumph, and that's what's really been happening. But I think people are starting to speak out, starting to see that, in fact, the identity politics is a terrible development in our country and needs to be obliterated as a way to think about the world and to think about our fellow people, our fellow man.
And that's donoharmmedicine.org. I know I signed up and I gave a little bit of money just because I believe so much in what you all are doing. And I believe that we all need to do something. And the very bare minimum we can do is sign up and just to be informed and to talk in our immediate circles, talk with family and friends about things that we're learning and base it on facts and science and not just a propaganda statement that we read in the news or what have you. So I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for not sailing off into the sunset, which you so earned. As you retired, you did earn that. And there are a handful of folks like you that have earned their retirement and have instead chosen to stand up for truth. And I know that takes time and effort and energy. And I just want to say thank you. You didn't have to do it, but our country and our country's medical schools are so glad you did.
Well, thank you so much. Great that Moms on a Mission is there and doing your job, and we really appreciate it as well.
Well, thank you. And Dr. Goldfarb, how can folks follow you? I know you said the last time that we can get your book on Amazon or wherever anybody can get books, Take Two Aspirin and Call Me by My Pronouns. Is it better if they go? Do you have a website or anywhere where it'd be better for them to get it there?
No, Amazon is it. That's the best place. And you know what? And I really tried to cover almost all the topics we've talked about, even though the book's about a year old. It's still, these issues are still fresh.
Yeah, sadly, it's incredibly still relevant. So
yes.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it. And I love that we can refer back to it. It's you just have so many sources cited. So not only can we see the information there, but we can go to the sources where you got your information from and look at that information there as well. So thank you so much for writing this. And thank you for spending some time with the Moms on a Mission podcast this afternoon and educating us. And we just want to say thank you for all that you're doing.
Great. Thanks so much. Great to be with you.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for listening. As always, you can email us at moms@momsonamission.net. That's moms@momsonamission.net. And then our website is momsonamission.net. And then we'd love for you to follow us on Rumble. It is truly the most uncensored platform out there. So if you download the Rumble app and then type in Moms on a Mission at the search bar at the top, and then click the follow icon, you will be notified when all new episodes are uploaded. So thank you all so much for listening, and have a great day. In light of recent bank volatility and skyrocketing inflation, diversification is a must. That's why I use my good friend Andrew Sorcini at Beverly Hills Precious Metals. Beverly Hills Precious Metals makes it so easy to diversify. I personally ordered some silver and it arrived on my doorstep just a few days later. They make it so easy. And if you're not ready to do that and you just want to ask a few questions, they're there for you too. I personally got some silver and also am rolling over some of my IRA. You can actually roll over your IRA and have it be backed by silver and gold. So if you don't have any extra money to invest in silver and gold, rolling over a 401k or an IRA, or even part of it, if you just want to try it at first, just for a little bit, you can do that as well. So go to bh-pm.com today and ask all your questions. You can connect with somebody. And like I said, you can just get some information at first if you want and pray about it, and then get back with them to roll over part of your IRA or all of it, or order some gold and silver. That's bh-pm.com, and tell them that Moms on a Mission sent you. Hey, everybody. Did you know that recent research from the CDC says that millions of Americans develop parasitic infections and symptoms often go unnoticed or are misdiagnosed? Parasites are actually the cause of many health problems such as anxiety, depression, chronic pain, fatigue, and unexplained digestive issues. We all need a common sense strategy to improve our health. Moms on a Mission encourages you to reach out to our good friend, Dr. Jason Dean. Dr. Dean's Full Moon Protocol provides all natural detoxification and fights inflammation. And the supplements are made with 100% organic ingredients and are proven to kill parasites safely and effectively. I know after I took Full Moon Protocol, I had more energy. To order your Full Moon Protocol today, go to bravetv.store/mission to save $20 off your first order. That's bravetv.store/mission. According to leading sleep experts and sleephealth.org, over 50 million Americans struggle getting a good night's rest. That's why Moms on a Mission loves MyPillow. MyPillow makes amazing pillows, sheets, mattress toppers, robes, towels, literally almost everything you need for a good night's sleep. They also make dog beds for your dogs. So by going to mypillow.com, typing in the code MISSION, you not only receive a high quality product, but you're supporting Moms on a Mission and this podcast. If you like what you're hearing and you agree with it, you believe in it, and you want to support Moms on a Mission, then go to mypillow.com today and order some high quality products, and just type in the code MISSION at checkout and you can save up to 66% off. That's mypillow.com, code MISSION.
Since 2014, Organic Body Essentials has offered clean, simple, certified organic skincare. Our organic face-to-feet and federally compliant hemp and pet products are manufactured under USDA and FDA guidelines. Our products are inspired by God using plants He created. In Ezekiel 47:12, it says, "The fruit is for food and the leaves for healing." We believe in the power of God to heal, so we pray over our products and for our customers. Our therapy in a bottle approach has been widely received, and our customers' testimonials continue to inspire us. You can find us at organicbodyessentials.com and obe.organicbodyessentials.com. Please feel welcome to reach out with questions. Use coupon code MISSION at checkout for a discount. Thank you for your support by using MISSION at checkout to benefit Moms on a Mission and their quest to reestablish traditional values in our education system and empowerment for a healthy lifestyle.